Welcome to the Old Guy AI podcast, brought to you by MongoDB. And now, here's Scott Sanchez and Pete Johnson.
Hello there. I'm Pete Johnson, and with me as always is Scott Sanchez. Today is Wednesday, September 24th. And Scott, it's been a big week of OpenAI announcements. Let me start by reading off some of the OpenAI Nvidia announcement that we got on Monday, and then we'll get to the announcements that they made yesterday. So on Monday, September 22nd, this is from the OpenAI blog article on this topic. Nvidia and OpenAI today announced a letter of intent for a landmark strategic partnership to deploy at least 10 gigawatts of Nvidia systems for OpenAI's next generation AI infrastructure to train and run its next generation of models on the path to deploying superintelligence. To support this deployment, including data center and power capacity, NVIDIA intends to invest up to $100 billion in OpenAI as the new NVIDIA systems are deployed. The first phase is targeted to come online in the second half of 2026 using NVIDIA's Vera Rubin platform. Thoughts about that first announcement that we got on Monday?
The first thing that stands out to me is that 10 gigawatts of power is what like the entire city of New York uses. Like that, it's so much power. It's hard to fathom. Like multiple nuclear power plants worth of power just for that. The other is just the sheer size of the investment and the project. You know, some analogies to like the Manhattan Project and like that sized initiative. And I'd be curious to do the math on like what did that cost versus what is this going to cost. But yeah, I mean it's obviously it is a landmark kind of deal. I think in someone's lifetime you don't necessarily come across too many relationships and investment levels that are at that size.
Here's what I don't understand about this one. So I think NVIDIA's inclusion in this, and later in that document, it does specifically mention Stargate. So this is part of the Stargate offering. So it sets up this weird feedback loop, right? Because we'll talk about this a little bit more later. But so Oracle's getting $300 million from OpenAI to provide GPUs, and presumably Oracle is then buying those GPUs from NVIDIA. NVIDIA is then investing money into OpenAI, and it sets up this very weird insular feedback loop that I don't quite understand.
I'm definitely not saying that this feels like a pyramid scheme or something, but like it is a weird collection of how the money is getting passed around, and the numbers are staggeringly large, right? We're not talking about like, oh, I'm going to pay you 10 million and you're going to pay me 10 million. It's like, I'm going to give you $100 billion and you're going to pass it to them and they're going to pass it to me. And so somehow like that's going to look like 300 billion worth of money. I'm not even sure how this works, but yeah, it's magical math.
Yeah, the math overall, I don't understand the math, and we'll get to this with the second announcement. I don't understand the math, and I particularly don't understand this part of the math. If they're just handing $100 billion around, and that's literally the Dr. Evil figure, between these three organizations, right? Yeah. When I told my wife about that, that's literally what she did.
That should be our thumbnail for this episode.
Yeah. So I guess let me ask it this way. We'll get to the second announcement, but certainly, the timeline of this year that started with the attention-grabbing theatrics in the White House in January with SoftBank, Oracle, and OpenAI. Who at this point do you think has a bigger stake in OpenAI? Larry, Jensen, or Sam Altman?
Oh, definitely not Sam. um, I think that Larry and Oracle are advertising their way into a nice chunk of OpenAI. Like, like they've only delivered like this much of what they promised, right? So, if they're sort of doing it in a like for like capacity, they're essentially earning out on their investment if they're treating it that way. I don't know how much actual money is going to change hands here.
Yeah, and that's what this announcement certainly makes it sound like. There's no money changing hands because it's just being circulated. But at some point, you have to pay the construction companies who are building these humongous data centers. So it's got to come from somewhere. Like this, and this is what I mean. Like, I don't understand this math. I don't understand how this is working. The second announcement, which let me read from that, like does not clarify that at all. So the second announcement, which came out yesterday, let me read the first paragraph of that. OpenAI, Oracle, and SoftBank are announcing 5 new U.S. AI data center sites under Stargate, OpenAI's overreaching AI infrastructure platform. The combined capacity for these 5 new sites, along with our flagship site in Abilene, Texas, and ongoing projects with CoreWeave, which that one's interesting, brings Stargate to nearly 7 gigawatts of planned capacity and over $400 billion in investment over the next 3 years. This puts us on a clear path to securing the full $500 billion 10 gigawatt commitment we announced in January by the end of 2025, ahead of schedule. So interesting to me that the second announcement doesn't mention Nvidia. The first announcement only mentions Stargate in one sentence. Like, if they were trying to lay out how this was getting funded and who's got what stakes and what, this is not how you would announce this. It very much feels like they're trying to obfuscate who's doing what and what the numbers are. Am I overreacting here, or do you have a similar feeling about this?
Most of these organizations are publicly traded. So at some point, the money has to show up on the books at some point, right? OpenAI is clouded in all kinds of interesting organizational structure, but certainly Nvidia, Oracle, these are large companies that have a lot of transparency around them, and I certainly have no reason to think that they're hiding anything. It will be interesting for me to see how they do the accounting on this. Like, this is very likely to be creative accounting, and they have more lawyers and accountants working for them than most companies have in total employees. So, I do think that they'll get it right. But it is it is interesting. It is curious. And again, just back to like the size of the numbers on these, and Oracle announcing, oh, we have this $300 billion, booking and backlog now. Like, that has to show up at some point. Somebody's got to pay the piper. Otherwise, shareholders are going to be disappointed.
Well, and that's where, like, the hand waving of this bothers me, right? So I tried to construct a timeline as best I could. Let me lay this out for you. So January 21st was the White House announcement. Then June 30th, Oracle teased with an SEC 8K filing that there was going to be $30 billion in ARR starting in fiscal 28 I think it was over a 5-year period. Then on August 7th, Bloomberg reports that none of the funds have been raised for Stargate. And we didn't see a whole lot of pushback from the parties there. But then September 9th, 10th, Oracle reported the full scope of the deal at being $300 billion over 5 years, which is different than the SEC 8K filing. And but the way that it's not booked revenue, it's, quote, remaining performance obligations, or RPO. And I'm not an accountant, but I've been in this business for 30 something years and I've never heard of that term before. But the RPO is now being raised 359% up to $455 billion. So, like, again, like, you couldn't make this less clear about how this money is being funneled from these different entities. And I'm wondering whether it's even necessary. Like, why are they doing all this hand waving? I don't understand this.
Look at Oracle's stock price, and it becomes very clear. Like, I think they had their best day since 1992 last week or whenever this was. Like, um, that that tells you everything you need to know. Like, Larry he's a say what you want about the man. He's a great businessman who has built something very durable over a long period of time, and this is just another example um, of him figuring out how to bring the pieces together. Um, it's still really curious to me that they picked Oracle for this at all, but that's a different conversation, given all the other players out there. And so that then leads me to further believe that there's real sort of equity transfer happening here, not just we're building you some data centers, right? Like there has to be more to this than just like they're giving us a good deal on the compute, right? I think that there's a deeper relationship that's being formed. In the fullness of time, we hopefully will find out what that means and how it's accounted for on the books, and how much actual revenue comes through versus in kind type of performance obligations. But there's no denying that this is a spectacularly sized relationship, and speaks to the long-term um, expectations of what OpenAI and smart folks like Larry believe that they're going to do in the market over the long term.
Yeah, in an earlier episode, you talked about how nobody's put together a reliable TAM on this, right? Nobody knows how big the market for this typically is. And you suggested that maybe you even have to start with all of IT spend, which is, a couple of $1 trillion. Like, that's how you would have to justify a company that up until this point has had less than 60 billion in funding, going up to 10x that, almost 10x in that, and from all the different players. I mean, to give you an idea of the size, I looked up, like, what's the biggest country whose GDP is less than $500 billion, and I came up with Denmark. So, like, the GDP of Denmark is less than how much money we're talking about these companies spending on these 10 gigawatt data centers. And the only way you can justify that is with, like, they think there's $1 trillion in revenue here, or else why else would you spend this much money? And that's like the risk there, if it doesn't turn into trillion, like, this is the biggest bet of all time here in many different ways. Either they're going to look brilliant because it's going to be, $1 trillion, or maybe even a multiplier of that, or it's not going to pan out, and they put a whole lot of money into building these, very expensive, what ultimately become empty buildings.
I'm less concerned that the capacity doesn't get used. And I think, if the global demand for data centers and GPU and equivalent capacity is not going down, right? And whether that demand is ultimately consumed and realized by OpenAI, or any of the dozens or thousands of up and coming players in the AI space, need some of that and end up using some of that or all of that. I wouldn't worry about the capacity. I'm actually glad, like, from an industry perspective, that these kinds of investments are being made. Like, these take a really long time to build that amount of capacity and bring it online. And I'm not talking about, like, can I get the GPUs? I'm talking about, like, building nuclear reactors takes time. And even with the administration saying that they're going to help fast track some of the regulatory red tape to get these things done, you're talking about buildings that will be the size of Manhattan put together, with power consumption that will equal all of what New York City uses. Like, it's going to take literally years, the better part of a decade probably, for all of that truly to come online. And so I'm glad that the money is being ponied up. I'm glad that multiple companies are building that out for the sake of humanity more than any one company. Um, and I would guess that within the next 6 months, this is not the only story of this size that we'll be talking about. Like, it just can't be.
Well, and that's where we get into, to me, the thing about these sort of grandiose announcements, whether it's the Nvidia 100 billion investment on Monday, or the idea that they've accelerated on the 500 million to build out our Stargate. Like, I don't care anymore. Like, when it comes to the announcements and the, hey, here's the stuff we're going to build, and they haven't actually built it yet. Like, I've gone, because they haven't been clear on how the money's going to flow, or what any of the how the shares, the stakes are getting divvied up. Like, I've gone from skeptic to cynic on this. Like, stop with the vague clickbait and like build better products that are delivered on time and with smooth deployments. Like, I think, like you, I am old enough to have seen Arthur Fonzarelli strap on some water skis and jump the shark when it originally aired. And like, these press announcements from OpenAI are becoming like that for me. Like, I don't want to hear about the spending anymore. I want to hear about, like, I'd much rather hear about the nuclear power plants and how they're going to power those things. How are you going to cool them? Way more interested in those details now than, the grandiose money announcements.
Or that we're going to put 10% of that $500 billion towards actually solving fusion power. Because I want my flying car. Can we get flying cars already? And time machines. Like, these are the things that we really care about. Look, I think I'm less of a skeptic or a cynic that, like, this will happen. It will happen. And if it's not OpenAI paying Oracle for it, it's going to be someone else paying someone else, or doing it themselves, or partnering with a country to go do it. And I don't mean like, oh, we have the support of the administration. I mean, like, it's not out of the realm of reality that the EU puts up $500 billion to help sovereign, to be its own sort of sovereign capability like this. If you think that China is not putting up this kind of money to further their own capabilities and agenda, like, they are, like, they have to be. And in this country, we just tend to do it through private industry more than government led. And I think we're just seeing evidence of that.
Well, we do have hoverboards that don't hover. So there's that.
And aren't boards.
And aren't boards. Yeah. But I just wish there was a little bit more clarity on what some of these things meant, as opposed to just repeating the 500 billion number. Like, even, what got lost in some of the other press from last week was, as they had to do some of that restructuring, that Microsoft still has $100 billion stake in the for-profit organization. Okay, but what percentage of that? Is that as a percentage of does that include some of this 500 billion? So it's been diluted. Like, and I mean, maybe those details aren't any of our business at this point, but like, who's driving the bus and who has influence? I agree with you that I think Larry was very astute at jumping in when he did, that he has way more influence over this now than he did a year ago. And that sets up that company for a level of significance that they weren't headed to before. But I agree with you, like, some of the details. So with one of these, not necessarily OpenAI's, but there's other companies or other organizations that are talking about building these, 5 to 10 gigawatt data centers. I happen to know somebody who knows something about those. And given the rural areas that they tend to be building them so that they have a blank slate to work on, just like the logistics of that, of they're having to build small towns to house the workers to then build the nuclear plants and the water processing before they can even get to building the data centers. Like that part of the logistics, I think, is fascinating, not just to me, but to a lot of other people. Much rather they start talking about that than, here's 12 other people who are each giving us $50 billion and it's a secret how much of a stake each of them have.
Yeah. I mean, look, because of how long, like these are large infrastructure projects, and because of how long they take, it's going to be a while before we figure out how they really materialize. So for now, it's a lot of marketing. It's a lot of investor relations type of talk and press releases and things. It's definitely having an impact on stock price. When that revenue materializes and all of that, like who knows? But it does signal long-term optimism for AI, and I think that's a good thing. Just to sort of close off on the Oracle thing, so people don't think that I'm too much of a Larry fan. I, I think this was a smart decision for a number of reasons. The one that really stands out for me is that out of all the potential, let's say, sort of infrastructure partners they could have chosen, Oracle is one that had both the balance sheet to pull some of this off, right? They generate a lot of free cash. They, got a ton of money in the bank, but also sort of has the most to lose if they don't figure out how to stay relevant, right? Like their core business probably hasn't been going in the direction that they want for a while, or at least not at the pace that they want. They've expanded into data center, they've expanded into cloud, they've expanded into other things with some levels of success. This felt to me like a Hail Mary. It was a very good Hail Mary if they can pull it off. $300 billion in revenue is nothing to sneeze at. But it really felt like that. It felt like, is this sort of Larry's last big thing that he's able to pull off? And if he does, like from a legacy perspective, like, kudos to you, sir. But I don't know. It really, I think it was in a number of ways, a Hail Mary that hopefully pays off.
As you were saying that, I think it is a legacy play. I mean, he's 81. He's born the same year as my dad, which blows my mind. And his sons, right? His sons are out conquering media, not involved in the family business per se. So yeah, maybe this is his last hurrah. And for him, it's risky, but maybe he doesn't care because,
he's already got his island. He's good, man.
Yeah. Well, you said Manhattan Project, and certainly there's been things about the size of the project. Let me hit you with another one that not as much money went into, but do you know what else is the size of Manhattan? I'll give you a hint. I'm going there next week on vacation. Disney World is the same size as Manhattan and has more hotel rooms than Manhattan does.
Is that true, really?
It is.
No, that can't be true.
There are more hotel rooms at Disney World than there are in Manhattan. Either that or Disney marketing has been lying to me for 10 years since they issued that statement. So the land was purchased in 65, 66. Magic Kingdom didn't open until 71, and Walt didn't live to see it. If you want a masterclass on how to do a business presentation, go look up the presentation that was shown to Florida legislators that created what was previously known as the Reedy Creek Improvement District, which essentially gave Disney World their own county to go do their own building codes. That until recently with the current administration there in Florida, they rejiggered that a little bit, but they basically got their own county to go build whatever they want. And even that took them 5 years.
I do remember that Disney World is like 40 square miles or something. Like it's the amount of land that they procured back then to build this thing, and were able to cobble together silently and quietly. You talk about a legacy, like the fact that they pulled that off. Back then there wasn't social media, so it was probably easier. But but I don't know. Like it feels a lot like Larry building a $300 billion data center. Like that's what he's going to leave behind.
They set up 3 dummy corporations to buy what was then farm and swampland around I-4 outside of Orlando, and didn't announce until they had most of it purchased, who the ultimate owner of those organizations were. And really it was to solve the problem in 54, 55, when they were building Disneyland. They couldn't get the funding from the banks to buy as much land as they wanted to. They could only buy enough for the parking lot and where Disneyland itself sits for many, many years. I don't think it was until like the late 90s that they even owned the Disneyland Hotel. That was a separate, although the name was indicated that it was part of the organization, it was not. And that's why you can walk across the street from where you hit the trams at Disneyland and walk into a Cold Stone or walk into a Denny's literally across the street, because they didn't have enough money to buy the berm around them. And they were like, okay, when we do this on the East Coast,
Never again. Yeah.
Never again.
So ChatGPT, powered by Oracle, maybe, says that there are 36,900 and so hotel rooms in Walt Disney World, of which 23,000 are owned by Disney. That is compared to, it's a 2015 number, 107,000 in Manhattan. So you're off by a little bit, but 37,000 hotel rooms in one entertainment zone is significant.
Well, now I feel like I've been either ChatGPT is wrong, which it's never wrong.
It's never wrong.
I've been duped by Disney marketing for the better part of a decade, because I've repeated that line at all kinds of tech events and now feel foolish for doing so.
I might have to run this through the Voyage AI re-rankers to see if we can reduce the hallucination here.
Fair. So regardless of how this turns out, like I said, I wish they would turn the page on, the grandiose claims about money, and let's get to some of the logistics. Like, how are you actually doing this? Because that would be far more interesting to me. Like, how many nuclear power plants? How are you? You're introducing these things into rural areas. How are you handling the nuclear waste that's coming out of that? How are you recycling the water? Like that kind of stuff. I want to see that kind of stuff. I'm done with hearing about the financial announcements.
Well, in the meantime, it's wait and see who's gonna try and one up them. It's gonna be tough to do, and I do think that whoever comes up with more money than that is probably somehow, like I said, affiliated with some kind of country or group of countries, like in the EU, that feels like they need to be able to compete with that type of alternative. And I don't know, I genuinely feel excited that we are making, like, as humanity, we are making these kinds of investments in technology, even if they'll take 5 or 10 years to really pay off, because that's the pace at which the demand is growing. So I'm glad someone's getting ahead of it. I hope others continue to, because 10 gigawatts of power is not even going to scratch the surface of the additional capacity needs that we're going to have in the next decade. Like that's going to be like a drop in the bucket of what we really need.
Agreed. And yeah, it has to come from, whether it's EU, the Chinese government, the Indian government, maybe, like who's got $600 billion that they could dip into this. That's where you start the question at this point. And we know it's not Denmark, but who's got that kind of money that could start to invest in that kind of thing. And we'll see where this AI race, similar to what we saw in the space race in the 50s and 60s, we'll see where it ends.
The entire country of Denmark only consumes 6 gigawatts of power, just to put it in perspective.
Fair. Well, like I said, I'm on vacation next week, so I think we're going to skip, but we'll be back the week after that. Thanks for the time, Scott.
Thank you.
This has been the Old Guy AI Podcast. Views expressed here do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the sponsors or the employers of any hosts or guests.